So this is the most complicated review I have written or recorded to this point. No previous game has left me with so much that I want to say, and yet somehow I'm still unable to decide how I actually feel about the game. And even more strange is that never in my entire gaming career have I invested 40 hours into a game only to abruptly drop it without finishing it. Interestingly, many people seem to either love or hate this game. Yet, I find myself in a position I don't often hear from others, and that is that I'm basically right in the middle. So, first off, on the topic of spoilers. The majority of the review will be as spoiler-free as possible, even to the point that I will be vague about most of the unlocks and even some of the game mechanics. Because it's worth experiencing those things for yourself. Toward the end, when I talk about why I stopped playing, I will have a section of light spoilers, which I will call out ahead of time, and then I'll have another section of heavy spoilers, which I will talk about some major spoilers in both this game and the sequel that ended up finding its way to me. But again, I will very clearly call this out. Okay, so with that out of the way, let me say, even having played about half of the Metal Gear Solid franchise, I was not prepared for how amazingly bizarre this game is. And I 100% mean that as a positive and a negative. The story and the setting here are difficult to wrap your head around, but it invites a lot of mystery. It frequently feels weird for the sake of being weird, but at the same time, it's incredibly intriguing. I found parts of the story deeply engaging, and yet I found myself finding the urge to skip cutscenes regularly and sighing audibly at some of the writing. As I said at the top, I am deeply conflicted about how I feel about this game. Some of the dialogue is 100% throwaway. Delivery turn-in cutscenes, even for main missions, can feel incredibly generic and lifeless. Essentially, it's somebody saying, "Hey, thanks, good job, we really appreciate you." It's something to that effect over and over again, whether you're delivering a bunch of rocks or you're delivering a whole bunch of medical supplies. Either way, they're pretty happy, they're pretty appreciative. As far as the cutscenes, several scenes, at least for me, frequently outstayed their welcome, and yet these characters are incredibly unique. This bizarre world feels like it's just brimming with secrets that you will be lucky to even scratch the surface of. I do know that the story and the storytelling here are divisive, and it's easy to see why even in your first couple hours with the game. This is definitely Kojima at his most Kojima. Sequel excluded since I haven't played that. And that is likely to either land incredibly well for you or totally crash and burn. Or maybe you happen to end up in the middle like me. If you love Kojima's previous storytelling, you are going to be extremely happy with Death Stranding. However, if you really didn't vibe with Kojima's previous stories, I suspect this will land even worse for you. So that's some incredibly vague discussion on the story. So let's talk about the gameplay. Vaguely. I think by now everyone understands that the core of Death Stranding is about making deliveries. You are a porter moving packages from point A to point B for a variety of very important and very unimportant reasons. There is also some combat with humanoids and not so humanoids. Let me get this out of the way though. Combat is far from the focus of Death Stranding. In fact, I would guess in my playthrough it was maybe 10% of my total time, if that. So I would not come to this looking for combat. As far as how the combat is, it's serviceable. The humanoid enemies I did end up choosing to engage with for some specific items, and while I hated them at first, once I learned a little bit, the combat, even with limited weapons, became more engaging. It also helps when I realized as long as I didn't do dumb things, they posed very little threat as well, at least on the standard difficulty, which was kind of both a pro and a con. The non-humanoid enemies, yeah, I hate those encounters across the board. I find them to be far more tedious than fun, by a pretty large margin. Once you understand what you are doing, it is time-consuming, but very easy. And it's incredibly slow given several design choices. Overall, I don't think anyone is here for the combat, and that's good. because serviceable is about the nicest thing I could say about it. The delivery loop, though, is much better. As you make your way across large stretches, scouting a path, using tools to overcome terrain, and slowly making changes to the world to make your future deliveries easier, this loop is very satisfying, and unlike the combat, is super engaging. I found myself in a loop midway through the game where I was fully engaged in those improvements in the world that I mentioned, which would make my future trips easier. I didn't move the story forward for probably 3 or 4 gaming sessions, because I was building, and it was fantastic. It was relaxing, it was engaging, it was very satisfying to see your impact on the world. It was wonderful. As you travel, if you're playing online, you will start to have your world impacted by other porters. They will also be making improvements and changes to the world, and you can benefit from them as well. And they, in turn, will benefit from things you do. Out of everything in this game, I think this system is the most noteworthy and something that I would love to see other games kind of experiment with. To be clear, you never see another player, but you will see some changes they make to the world and some things that they leave behind. Also, 2 weird callouts. First, I usually hate durability systems, and somehow, I think they nailed it here. It is tuned really well, making you think about your equipment. Before you head out, you will at least periodically be checking on the condition of your equipment, building spares, and thinking about the toll that a particular journey may take on that equipment. The second shout out is for another system I usually hate, and that is encumbrance. Encumbrance is actually probably my most disliked system in any game. However, here, I carefully considered what I was taking before I headed out, particularly in the early game. Later in the game, I had more room for my gear, but I had more considerations of how I would be able to utilize my tools to deal with particularly heavy loads or large loads, which are not necessarily the same thing. These are probably the best implementations of these systems I have ever seen, full stop. They make the game better and don't feel like they are at odds with it. And as I said, I really hate these systems in other games. The durability system in Breath of the Wild is basically the single worst implementation of it I've ever seen, and I despise it there, and have yet to finish the game, and I think that is at least part of why. On the other hand, encumbrance, if I take something like a Bethesda game, I will actively avoid that Bethesda game until there are mods to where I can turn off encumbrance. In both of these cases, these are systems where they're absolutely at odds with the game that you're playing. In the case of the Bethesda game, you're really heavily encouraged to pick up all of this stuff. You need all of it. And at the same time, you can carry very little. So you're constantly playing inventory management to figure out what you can and can't carry. And then with Breath of the Wild, you are constantly engaging in combat, and yet your equipment is falling apart like it's made of paper. In my opinion, in both of those cases, they really take away from the experience, whereas what Death Stranding did with its encumbrance and durability really add to the game. They are not at odds with it. It really adds an extra layer of depth, and it's done incredibly well. So, as far as overall gameplay, the combat is forgettable, and it's absolutely not a reason to play this game. On the other hand, Delivery Simulator here is 1000% worth playing if that idea clicks with you. It's deep, it's rewarding, and you won't find anything else like this. If you love Kojima games, this is 100% worth playing. If you think that Delivery Loop has a chance at being fun for you, or you're just looking for something truly unique, this game is absolutely worth playing. If you love the Metal Gear Solid games and you're looking for more of that stealth and that combat, yeah, this isn't it. My suggestion is that for almost anyone even a little interested in this game, to try it and see if it clicks with you. Because honestly, it's a very unique game. While it was a little hit and miss for me, and I did stop playing for reasons that I'll discuss in a second, I still like what I played and I get why this is so loved. So, play it if you haven't, but if you bounce off of it, it's fine. But you owe it to yourself to at least try. So with that, now I'll explain a little bit about why I stopped short of finishing the game, and why I may never pick it back up. Alright, so light spoilers initially. Okay, light spoilers incoming. So, as most of you would know, having played the game or not, in Death Stranding, you play with what is essentially a container with a baby attached to you from the start. It also should be no surprise that the game's story definitely helps strengthen the bond with that baby that is attached to you. And I can say, particularly as a parent of a 1-year-old, I was an easy mark. So that sounds good, right? While being vague, let me just say that I ran into some spoilers that left me with no desire to finish it. I had made it through and finished most of the satisfying gameplay as far as I can tell, having built most of the roads, progressed to the later chapters. The main thing I needed to do was finish the story. And so after running into some spoilers and finding out a little more about that story, which I'm actually kind of glad I ran into, I have no interest in continuing. At least not right now. Okay, so that's as vague as I can be. What follows next is heavy spoilers, not just for Death Stranding, but for the sequel. Although I guess if you saw the last trailer released, which I really hadn't until recently, then maybe these aren't major spoilers. Okay, large, full spoilers in 3, 2, 1. So, Polygon recently wrote an article with a very clickable headline, as Polygon does, talking about content warnings. While I don't want to rehash everything being said there, I will talk a little bit about content warnings in a second. However, as for why I stopped playing, it has to do with Lou, aka the BB, aka the baby that you're carrying in Death Stranding 1. From the article, and some reading, not only did I learn that Lou dies and then is brought back at the end of Death Stranding 1, but that Lou dies again, and horrifically so, in Death Stranding 2. Now, I read enough to know that this isn't the full story, and that's fine. And to be clear, this is 100% a me issue. I am a parent of a 1-year-old, and I can still remember sitting in the hospital those first nights, watching her breathe, unable to sleep, willing her tiny body to keep breathing, terrified that I wouldn't hear her or she would need me. Anyway, that feeling is still very close, as is the first 6 months of watching her sleep, worried about SIDS, and now she is moving, grabbing everything, trying to shove it in her mouth, and I'm terrified all over again. And if you have any imagination, let me just say your brain cruelly plays through what it would look like if you fail. It's a feeling that nature almost certainly put there to ensure that you do everything you can to protect them. So, when I realized that the game is not only going to kill the baby off once, but twice, and in the sequel, there is a very lengthy scene vividly showing this baby die, and then watching Sam deal with the trauma, I'm just not in a place where I want to deal with that. Honestly, there was not enough for me here to be willing to subject myself to that. I'm aware that many may say, well, it's just a game. To that I would say, yes it is, and yet at the same time, I think many of us would make the argument that gaming is some of the most immersive storytelling of any medium. Saying it's just a game completely undermines that. Things like this hit hard because by playing a game, you become connected to these characters and these worlds. As far as content warnings, here's what I will say. I do not think that content warnings should ever impact those that don't want to experience them. That even includes them having to accept a warning or anything like that. Something that's popping up, interrupting gameplay, that shouldn't happen. That said, I would highly recommend having a solution where I could, let's say, click a button on the main menu and get a description of particularly tough content. I should be able to find it somewhere. In a perfect world, ratings like the ESRB would mean something, and on their site they would give information like this. However, if you go read through what the ESRB says about Death Stranding 2, there is no mention of the topics that Polygon covers in their article, although it goes out of its way to tell you about how the deliveries work and some particular use of adult language, because of course it does. Anyway, this is why I stopped playing. Once I realized that what was waiting for me later in this game, and what would be waiting for me in the sequel, it just killed any desire to keep going. But as I said, I recognize this is 100% a me problem. So I will leave it there. I may finish it at some point down the road. Overall though, as I said, for most people, I would recommend giving this a shot. You may bounce off, but it may surprise you as well. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to my somewhat personal rant. And yeah, I'll see you for the next one.